Doing a lot of jiu-jitsu can be really intense and taxing on joints like your shoulders, elbows, knees, hips, and lower back. And if you're anything like me, when you start to ramp up your training frequency and intensity, sometimes things can feel a little jammed up. So if that's you, I wanted to give you 2 simple techniques to implement today that will help things feel a little unstuck and relieve some of that pressure and pain that you might be experiencing after those hard training sessions. For those that are new here, my name's Connor Adams and I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I primarily coach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athletes and hobbyists. Based out of the Tampa, Florida area, I've been doing Jiu-Jitsu for an accumulated about 4 or 5 years. I honestly don't remember because I had a 12-year gap in training. I'm currently a purple belt under Travis Baumgartner at Gracie Fishhawk in Lithia, Florida. So the main topic of today's video is going to be on a technique called traction. You might find this in a lot of physical therapy or chiropractic settings. And I need to make the disclaimer now that I'm not a physical therapist and I'm not a chiropractor. So if your PT or your chiro has told you that you should only be doing traction under their supervision, you should probably listen to them. I'm simply going to share with you a DIY or at-home version of doing traction. And it's something that I implemented several years ago to get through some really bad low back pain flare-ups that I had. And I still use it to this day. It's more reactive for me, but it does really help when I get into those periods of time where my joints just feel a little bit jammed up. So how do we actually use traction? Well, the main use case, at least for me, is I want to create negative pressure or space in those affected joints, like my AC joint or my hips and lower back. And in doing so, I find that I get a lot of relief of that pressure and pain that might be building up over a period of time where my training frequency and intensity is picking up at the same rate. For context, I've been dealing with lower back pain all of my adult life since I was about 18 years old, and I'm now 32. It started with these weird crippling spasms that put me on the floor. I was walking funny. I had this weird lateral shift in my rib cage, and it really, really hurt. And for years, there was no formal diagnosis as to what the root cause of that pain was. Yes, I have herniated discs, but we now know through the literature that's available that herniated discs are not always a key metric in diagnosing the source of someone's low back pain. And it took me about 10 years to realize that traction was a really, really effective means for me to get through some of those really bad flare-ups. I discovered traction therapy as I was exiting my time in the United States Navy. There was this month where I just had a really bad lower back pain flare-up. The spasms were so severe that I was walking funny. I had that shift in my rib cage, and every step that I took was just painful. So when I discovered traction, I also discovered that it's really costly if you are going to go and spend money out of pocket at a chiropractor. You may spend hundreds or thousands of dollars going through traction therapy multiple times per week. So I wanted to find a DIY version of this to do at home. And the version that I found just involved the use of some sort of vertical support surface like a squat rack and a heavy, thick resistance band. When I first implemented it, I was doing this about 5 days per week for a month straight. And in doing so, I think I relieved, I'd say, about 90% of those big, heavy pain signals that were just keeping me from performing my best and doing the lifts that I wanted to do. Before we get into the setup, I need to make it very clear that doing traction therapy is a pain relief technique for me. It is not a fix all to my issues. It's very important that you use this sparingly, and the bulk of your training programs and anything that you do to mitigate or even alleviate pain symptoms from certain injuries be focused around enhancing the quality of certain tissues and making those structures stronger so that they are less likely to become injured and less likely to succumb to those big pain signals that kind of cripple you and inhibit you from doing the activities that you love doing. So again, use traction sparingly, but it is very, very helpful in getting through a hump. So the first setup that I'm going to walk you through is actually just for your shoulders and elbows. This was kind of an afterthought when I started doing jiu-jitsu more. I noticed that when I started to do a lot of gi work and even a lot of choking and gripping and ripping in no gi, that my shoulders and elbows seemed to just get a tremendous amount of fatigue and soreness. And that was an indication of 2 things. 1, I was probably gripping too hard, but 2, the activity simply just exceeded the capacity that I had for it. And so I wanted to see some quick pain relief while I also came up with a more robust strategy for strengthening my shoulders, my elbows, and the tendons and ligaments and muscles that surround them. So I started doing traction for my upper body in those periods of time where my elbows and shoulders were just feeling kind of cooked. So I'm going to walk you through the 2 methods for doing traction on your arms. And I'm going to start with the heavy resistance band, and then I'm going to move on to a second technique after that. All right, so as you can see, I've looped my heavy, thick resistance band around the pull-up bar on my squat rack, and I just used a lark's head knot so that I had this nice loop dangling here below. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my arm into the opening there, and then I'm going to kind of crisscross the band over top of my wrist, and then I'm going to put my hand through this opening here. From there, I'm going to pull it tight a little bit, and then I'm going to do this kind of Ninja Turtle grip over top of both of the bands so that they're both in between my ring and middle finger, okay? I want to make sure that as I start doing the actual traction here, that I'm not squeezing very hard on the band. I want to kind of relax, and I want to let the tension of the band pull my arm away from my shoulder. And all I'm going to do is step away from the squat rack to a point where I start to feel it create that space in my shoulder joint. You might even want to rotate in and out of certain positions, and you might feel a different stretching sensation, a little bit of that negative pressure and space being created at the shoulder, maybe in the elbow, maybe even at the wrist. And again, we're not gripping, we're not squeezing, we're just letting the band do the work here. I'm going to hold this for anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes per arm. So this is technique number 1. Let's go over to technique number 2. All you need is a door. Okay, so for technique number 2, I'm just going to use a doorknob. I do recommend a ball-shaped doorknob for this, so if you don't have one, go buy one. But all I'm going to do is the same Vulcan or Ninja Turtle grip. I'm going to wrap that around the ball of the doorknob, and then I'm just going to kind of lean away a little bit here, and that's going to create that separation and that space in the AC joint up here. This one, the only drawback is that you do need to rely on grip a little bit more compared to the cable, but it's the same concept. I would hold this for 2 to 5 minutes and then switch arms. Okay, so that wraps up technique number 1 for traction on the upper body. We're gonna now shift to implementing traction for the low back and the hips. So as part of the setup for doing traction on your hips and low back, you wanna have something in front of where you'll be doing the traction that acts as an anchor. And for this, I use my flat bench, and then I weigh it down with something like my kettlebells or some additional weight plates. This should be your first part of the setup for doing traction on your hips and low back. So I'm going to use some sort of vertical support surface that I can wrap my resistance band around. Conveniently, I have a squat rack in my garage, so I'm going to wrap it around the upright on my squat rack here. Same idea, lark's head knot right around the post here. I'm going to wrap this around and feed it through, and usually this ends up somewhere between like mid-thigh to hip for me. I don't really have a preference for this, but when we get this set up, I'm then going to step into the loop. Once I step into the loop, I'm going to put that just above my butt, and then I'm going to step back a little bit, but I'm going to kind of step over the loop here, and I'm going to hold the band while I do it so that it doesn't pull down too hard on my private parts. So now that I'm in position, I'm going to have this kind of feed through my legs. Okay, so once I'm complete with my setup, I'm going to then crawl forward and anchor myself to the bench, and I'm going to start traction on my hips and low back. So to get this started, I'm going to slowly sink down onto my knees. Hopefully the resistance band does not tomahawk me in the nuts, because this thing is old and a little bit corroded. But from here, I'm just going to crawl forward a little bit. I'm going to crawl forward a little bit more, and then I want to get to a point where I can just kind of relax, and I'm going to let the band pull my hips away from my body as I am anchored to the bench here. And I like to hold this one a little bit longer than I do for my arms, in some cases up to 10 minutes, but usually a good range for me has been 5 to 10 minutes. While you're down here, breathe deeply, breathe heavily, relax your low back, let the bands pull your hips away from your low body. You might feel a little bit of weird, uncomfortable feelings. Just kind of gradually let that come on. Don't have these very sudden, abrupt jolts of traction. You want to ease into this very carefully. Now, after your time is up, you want to slowly and cautiously, very carefully, get back up to a standing position. And you're just going to step out of the bands the way that you stepped in. That is by bringing your leg back through and standing back up. All right, guys, that's all I got for today. Just a reminder, this is a very reactive thing for me today. I usually only implement this in those periods of time where my training frequency and intensity is really ramping up and my joints start to feel very stiff and stuck. This helps to make them feel unstuck. But overall, we should be doing a strength training program that takes our bodies through a full and complete range of motion, and it will help build resilience around those structures that are commonly subject to injury and pain. And so hopefully we don't ever need to do stuff like this. But when you get to those points in time, I think it is important that you have a strategy to not only relieve that pressure and pain, but to get you back to performing your best. This is just one tool in the toolbox. I hope you guys found this helpful. If you did, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe, and follow me on Instagram at Connor Adams PT. And if you're interested in me being your strength coach, I left a training application down in the description. You can fill that out to see if we're the right fit for each other.